welcome to episode 10 of Leadership Conversations with Krishna. And today I'm pleased to have my guests. I have two guests today, Dr. Badri Narayanan Gopalakrishnan, who's currently joining us from Rwanda in Africa, and Sriram Balasubramanian, who's joining us from the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. I'll just take a moment to introduce both my guests, starting with Sriram. Sriram Balasubramanian is an economist and author. He is the best-selling author of Dharmanomics and Kautilyanomics for Modern Times. Uh, Dr. Badri is an economist and strategy leader with about quarter century of global experience. Academically, he is an affiliate faculty member at University of Washington, Seattle, Oregon State University, and Boston College. Dr. Badri founded Infinite Sum Modeling LLC in 2015, which has a global presence and offices in Vancouver, Seattle, Los Angeles, Riyadh, Beijing, and New Delhi. He has advised over 100 client organizations globally. Welcome, Dr. Badri and Sriram.
Thank you.
Just to set the context about our conversation today, we will be talking in deep about the India, Middle East, Europe trade corridor, also known as IMEC, and its possible impact on India's GDP. Sriram and Dr. Badri, along with Atul Chandran Nambiar, wrote a paper titled India, Middle East, Europe Trade Corridor and its possible impact on India's GDP. This paper was presented at the American Economic Association annual conference held in San Francisco. This is one of the top gatherings for economists worldwide. Just jumping right in, starting with Dr. Badri. Can you tell us a little bit about when was IMEC first conceived and why IMEC in the first place?
So, thank you very much, Mr. Krishna, for having us. And I would also like to, say right now that I'll be here for just a short time, and Mr. Sriram will add more perspectives on this. So, in terms of IMEC, the main reason why IMEC has become a very important geopolitical, global, geoeconomic kind of collaboration between different countries is because of several reasons. The first is that when China started this Belt and Road Initiative, One Belt One Road Initiative, and it is a huge endeavor, great project, and connected so many countries. But at the same time, while it led to a lot of infrastructure improvements and a lot of investments from China and so on, but there are several downsides as well for several countries in that. Then many countries started thinking about how to come up with an alternative, connection infrastructure, which also can solve some fundamental constraints and problems that we have in the global trade, logistics, infrastructure, area. So that is how this whole thought process started. So it's not, of course, India is a major player here, but you also have some of the Middle Eastern countries, if not all of them, and then you have the European countries also there. So this was thought of as not in a very formal sense, but in an informal way. It's kind of the answer of many countries that are not completely aligned with the OBOR, One Belt One Road Initiative, to come up with an alternative, which can be a positive alternative. So it doesn't have to be saying that we are not joining that or something. Some of the countries can be members in both, but this can solve other problems that is not solving. So the connection starting from India to the Middle Eastern countries. So some of it is going to be road, some of it is going to be waterways, the ocean, sea. Some of it also could be rail. So the easy pathway from going from India up to the EU is the main consideration here. And in the G20 recently, and when India chaired G20, it was very formally announced, and although the discussion started way before that, and there has been a lot of policy discussions on that. Every time the political leaders from each of these countries go to the other country, they talk about it and they make some progress. Because of the current tensions in the Middle East, it's getting delayed, and it's getting a bit uncertain as to how far it's going to progress in terms of speed. But definitely, it is in the high priority of most of the countries in the radar in the grouping. And our analysis, which Mr. Sriram will give more deeper perspective on that, has been probably their first study that looks into this from a quantitative perspective, while also considering the geoeconomic, geopolitical importance of that. And also in today's environment of trade policy uncertainty globally, in terms of who is increasing tariffs, who is going to retaliate, and so on. This is a very important way in which countries can engage with each other while one set of uncertainties go on. This can act as a stabilizing thing in terms of reducing the costs that have existed for several decades. So that is the main thing. So by making it easy to transport goods from one country to other, it reduces some of the trade costs. If you look at the literature on trade costs, tariffs, you will see that the trade costs which are not tariffs, those are actually much higher than tariffs. So today we talk about 10%, 20%, 30% tariffs, but the non-tariff barriers, the trade costs are in the tunes of dozens of percentage points, like something like 200%, 100%, 150%. That's the numbers you're talking about. So while this may seem like a relatively small endeavor, given all this sound bites and noise here that are being created by tariffs, it is actually a big deal, because you're talking about reducing costs uh, by substantial amount, the transportation cost by substantial amount, and the trade barriers as well. In the past, in the WTO, we had made some progress on what is called a trade facilitation agreement in Bali, which actually nudged many countries towards making it easy to export and import in terms of customs facilitation and so on. But very little was done on the transportation side, infrastructure and transportation side. And this kind of IMEC, the way it's going on, can act as a kind of a precedent for many such projects that can happen in the future. IMEC itself can be extended to other countries, or there could be similar projects like this. And also, one major difference between IMEC and OBOR is that IMEC is a collaboration between all these countries, whereas OBR is a grand initiative of Chinese government. The other countries are more like participants in that. So this is also gives an example of how countries can collaborate together to come up with this kind of a grand infrastructure project. So those are the points I had in mind. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Badri, for your initial comments and summarizing, the importance of IMEC so well, right? And, IMEC was also in the news recently because Prime Minister Modi of India went to Cyprus. And, a lot of experts mentioned that IMEC was a big factor in his visit to Cyprus and even maybe his visit to Croatia in the later half of his trip, right? You covered the introduction pretty well. I just jumping to Sriram now. Um, do you think that IMEC is an alternative to the Suez Canal, or is it more an additional trade route? An additional to what is already exists.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, thanks to this, Krishna. It's good to connect with you. Yeah, answering a question, I think, look, the Suez Canal is a common pathway which anyone can use. So it's a trade route which has been there for hundreds of years. But the IMEC is different in the sense that you're having a set of countries, through the multilateral institutional mechanism of, say, the G20 based in Bharat, who've come together for a common economic cause. And this cuts across the region, and involves the United States, India, and all these countries. So it's a much more sort of consolidated exercise, which brings together a lot of common interest on commerce. So in that sense, I think there is a difference between, both. And I think IMEC, through its, through the articulation in the G20 as an extension, also the negotiations which have been happening, is a very important sort of bridge, not just to economic prosperity or trade, increased trade, but also a greater sort of, as an extension, also geopolitical peace in the region, because it's a combination of various factors in terms of road, rail, and maritime infrastructure which is required to facilitate this. So in a fairly fragmented world, I think this is an important avenue where Bharat can play an important role. And it's also a grouping which is, fairly aligned, fairly small compared to other groupings, which I think would serve the interests of the people who are involved in it. So in that sense, I think it's an important agreement in the context of today's world. And I think it will serve as a good base for greater commerce, greater trade among within the stakeholders in the IMEC corridor.
Yeah, thank you for those initial comments, right? And just I know your paper covered it in detail, but if you could at a high level tell us in terms of GDP impact, right? Which all countries is this likely to impact positively, and in terms of numbers, is
Yeah,
it
look,
just going to
I
be
think,
is it just going to be
the
India
paper,
or other countries?
yeah, the paper basically uses, I mean, I don't want to get too technical, but the paper basically uses a CGE model, which is basically a computational general equilibrium model, called GTAP, which is a sort of an important or major trade model, which is used for a variety of trade research done across the world. And through this model, we basically estimate the improvement in India's GDP because of this model, of this IMEC corridor. And of course, we keep the parameters in terms of tariffs, in terms of input cost, output cost, input-output models. So we bring a variety of features into the model in very simple terms and estimate the broader impact of this on the GDP of the countries, and with a focus on India. So in India's case, we see a reasonable increase in GDP over this period if the countries come together in a very conservative estimate. So what we are trying to say is that, from what you're seeing, if this corridor comes through with base parameters, then it could have a positive impact on the Indian GDP story. This is what quantitatively, we've done, and we're also doing an extension of this paper, which incorporates the recent tariff announcements, especially the base 10% rate tariffs. I don't think it should make a major difference to the overall story, but I think what we're trying to see, or what the research is leading us to say, is that two major things. One, an agreement like this, with all these stakeholders, is an important driver of economic growth in Bharat, in terms of both exports, in terms of our consumer market, our products being traded in this zone, or the other way around as well, in terms of we benefiting from some of these agreements. So one, it has a substantive or reasonable impact, positive impact on India's GDP. And two, I think it provides an important cost enabler for stakeholders in the system, which means companies who are trading, private firms which are trading as part of this agreement, and also public entities. Individual firms, I think, benefit a lot from the cost leverage or the cost arbitrage that you're getting because of this agreement. So I think that's again an important tool. Of course, in the context of the recent tariffs, if this trade agreement can be enhanced to gain some added advantage to reduce even the 10% rate, and I think that could be other avenues of enhancing this corridor. But in the present, I mean, the summary of the research is that through this model and analysis, we are seeing an improvement in India's GDP because of the corridor, and also greater potential for us to leverage our trade strengths in the process.
Yeah, no, that's great, right? And with the overall GDP increasing, I picked up improvement in logistics and also trade agreement, could further that. Now I'll jump into both those topics, and I know logistics is something that India has been focusing very keenly. Nitin Gadkari also, I think his viral statement is that India's logistics cost needs to come down. If I'm not wrong, he mentioned somewhere around 8%. Now, even what you mentioned, it talks about the same, right? Improving logistics through these new routes. How does that translate to actual increase in manufacturing within the country? What's the link between improving your logistics internally and externally, translating to better manufacturing output or make in India in Bharat, in our country?
Yeah, look, in very simple terms, right? Let's take an example so that it's easier for your listeners, right? Let's say you have a garment manufacturer or a who's based in Tirupur in Tamil Nadu, for example. Let's say it's a small firm or a medium-sized firm which has been manufacturing garments for the rest of the world, right? So basically, you produce, say, clothes, and then you export it to the rest of the world. Okay. So what the IMEC basically does is first it provides you a consistent demand pool, which means assuming the countries within IMEC, they are interested in garments, right? So instead of one country, you're having a pool of countries together, which can consolidate some amount of demand, which can increase economies of scale. So if, for instance, this garment producer was producing, say, 10 million shirts in a particular period of time, now the demand can be 50 million shirts because there are, say, 6-7 countries involved, right? So the economies of scale have increased for this particular manufacturer, right? For you to export to this market, because naturally the market itself is bigger, right? Two, in terms of the logistics, what we mean by logistics, ease of logistics is what really, there are two things to it, right? I mean, one is the cost arbitrage, which means because of the fact that there's an agreement in place, there's a lot of cost reductions in logistic cost across the way, which can be enabled because of this, right? And two is the ease of logistics, which means, again, due to this agreement, you're having, say, for example, you want to export to some of these countries within this agreement. You don't need to go through the standard process, the bureaucracy which you had with individual countries, because together you're able to reduce a lot of time in terms of logistics, and that time is money, so that reduces also the overall cost of shipments and things like that. So that's another indirect sort of development. So for the same firm in Tirupur, not only is it expanding the economies of scale, which means you have a much more consolidated, bigger market with favorable terms for an individual exporter. And two, it also ensures that your ease of logistics is also improved, which means your cost premium is also better. So this will obviously lead to greater production because you want to supplement this demand. So you produce more. And then you look at, better scaling, better developments, and better efficiencies, because the expectation from this group of some of them advanced countries is more efficient products. So that again will result in greater imports because you want to import better products for greater efficiency and then build economies of scale. Of course, this also provides incentives for local production to enhance efficiency and build aggregated scale. So, for example, the same Tirupur firm for, say, making, textiles. You might need a textile machine. You might need a variety of tools that are required in textile manufacturing. And all those centers could be scaled locally and built locally, to cater to, say, the 50 million demand, for instance, right? Which again, this economies of scale ensures that your local supplier base also increases, assuming that they can produce the quality that's required. And so this has a ripple effect, not just on the firm, but a set of associated affiliated firms who can again expand economies of scale. So this is the sort of, I would say, benefit. So, some of these firms, I'm just talking about a small firm, right? Bigger public sector, public institutions are, of course, the quantum will increase. But the general concept is this: you have direct economies of scale and you have indirect economies of scale. And both of them are enhanced using a mechanism like this.
Yeah, that's a fascinating explanation, right? And it's great that you linked it to economies of scale. And in the whole IMEC thing, we are also getting access. I mean, India is getting access to the European Union market, and with just sticking to the two topics we covered, logistics and now trade. You talked about trade agreements. Tariffs could further enhance, right? Now, if you see within the IMEC, there's largely four bodies, right? India, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and the EU. Now, I believe that India and United Arab Emirates already have a comprehensive economic partnership agreement between them, SEPA, and India and EU are negotiating a trade deal at the moment. Do you think that uh, the agreement already in place, and if India signs a deal with EU, would further enhance what is already over the logistics and economy scale? Could it be further enhanced with these trade deals? And also, if you could help us understand where these trade deals are at the moment.
Yeah, I think, I mean, these are two independent entities, right? We are talking about bilateral trade agreements and multi-country trade agreements, right? Often the post sort of 2020 story or even 2016 story is that countries start to prefer a much more, bilateral agreements for a variety of reasons, right? Predominantly starting from the United States, which is a separate topic altogether, right? Because it's between individual countries and individual differences, individual similarities between countries, right? What we are talking about here is a sort of a multi-country agreement. And then, of course, there are constraints with the multi-country. For example, we did not join RCEP, which is a regional trade agreement, a couple of years back, for reasons best known to our government, which I think would be justified on their own counts. In this particular case, I think what helps is the countries involved already have good bilateral relationships, right? Which means that they already have good terms of references, good terms of agreements. So if their bilateral trade deals are more, are done in a smooth way, then it makes this agreement function even more smoother. Because what you're basically doing is you're taking a group of people with common interest who are already well gelled together, bringing them together into a common pool. So it will further enhance, I think, the efficiency of this agreement, of the IMEC agreement. So I think my sense is, while the bilateral trade agreements are an independent sort of track, but the relationships developed based on these agreements and the past relationships with these countries, feeds on to the IMEC as well. And in the IMEC, the synergies are more, and the economies of scale are more. Geographical, coverage is also more. And so that way, I think these things can sort of catalyze efficiencies in the IMEC.
No, that's great to hear, right? And in terms of like products and services, which products are likely to kind of go through this corridor, and which is likely to maybe increase from the existing uh, from today?
Yeah, I mean, we dwell into a bit of detail in the paper. So I'll leave your readers to probably read the paper for further details. But in general, if you notice, um, what are our strengths in terms of exports, right? I mean, we've been exporting services as one of our major exports. Now we started exporting, mobile phones and things like that. So whatever our strengths are, I feel those areas are getting improved in the IMEC, right? And those are getting enhanced. So that's one bucket, right? Your current strengths in terms of trade exports, that is getting improved. Another is there are certain countries in this corridor uh, uh, who are, um, you know, um, uh, who have certain specific needs. So, for example, some of the Middle Eastern countries, they want particular products, particular spices, particular, like when we mentioned about textiles, right? That's another instance. Like one or two countries within this group might want some specialized products, right? Those areas will again get a boost in terms of specialized products. But by and large, if you notice, if you really take over the last 20, 30 years, the composition of a trade, right? I'm not talking about the quantity. The quantity is a different story. If you look at the composition of trade, it's been more or less the same in terms of percentage of the various components, right? The sub buckets, right? So I think this provides an opportunity for a bit more diversification because you have certain countries which might want certain specialized goods. Perfumes is another example. There's a lot of demand for perfumes in Middle Eastern countries from Bharat. Spices, textiles. So these are some areas where we see that there are some, improvements. And then, of course, commodities like oil and a few other, major commodities also play a role. But by and large, I think the composition needs to shift a bit for greater diversification. Whether that happens or not is a different story. We see as it implements. But these are some areas where I see, there could be some traction. One is the generalized space where we have strengths in our exports. Another is sort of specialized for particular countries where there are specific needs where we can complement.
You mentioned oil, right? And India is a major importer of oil, and one in the top five of our imports is UAE and Saudi also. I mean, last I checked, might not be in the top five, but is definitely one of our top oil import destinations. Now, these two countries are also in the IMEC. Is this can we see an reduction in the import bill because of this? Is it likely to translate to maybe a cheaper uh, bill for India and then translating to the consumer?
Yeah, I think there could be possibilities, but by and large, I think from my experience, commodities are driven by market prices, right? There might be some discounts here and there, but by and large, what the market prices drive, I mean, they drive predominantly the price that consumers pay or our countries pay, and of course, as an extension, the consumer also will pay. So I don't see. I mean, it depends on how the agreement pans out and how it evolves. But I don't see a substantive change in terms of the price points of some of these major commodities. But where I see a lot of advantages is, in terms of transportation of these commodities, right? In terms of logistics of these commodities, in terms of the supply chain of the commodities. I think that's where these economies of scale can help you to make cost adjustments, and that's where companies or public sector oil companies could benefit, given the economies of scale that I mentioned earlier and ease in logistics. That's an area where costs could be saved, but that's something we need to watch out for. And I think, look, there's a lot of potential in this. The question really is how it gets implemented. And that's something we are eager to see how this evolves.
Yeah, shifting a little bit into the deeper aspects of logistics, right, and supply chain. Another aspect that commentators in the recent past have been kind of commenting about is India's reliant. I mean, uh, India is not very self-reliant on using its own ships or containers to transport goods, right? How do you see, you know, through this? Do you think that India can improve its capacity to build its own containers and ships and reduce its dependence on China? And what do you think can be further done on that subject?
Yeah, I think that's another important point, right? Because this again provides us the scale for us to do it. Because one of the reasons why we are not able to do this because we need an aggregated demand for a particular area for us to enhance our capabilities, or at least invest in our capabilities, right? So that there is some return on investment. So I think this provides us the opportunity, yes, of how we can sort of improve our infrastructure, and then also you know cross get resources, get expertise from other countries to build more efficient infrastructure, right? Like how we use the Japanese agreements with the Japanese for our bullet trains. That's an example, right? Where cross fertilization of best practices from another country can be used to boost our infrastructure, which eventually benefits us. So I think those sort of synergies can also develop because of this, and we see some scope if it is done in an appropriate manner. To expand these economies of scales and expand infrastructure as well. I think one of the features of the IMEC is by nature of it, because you have, like what Badri mentioned, you have road, you have rail, you have various transportation networks, and all these need to be built. Some of them are not yet built, some of them need to be enhanced, and you need people to do it. So if you need resources, you need Indian companies, for example, could invest in infrastructure projects across the Middle East to enable the building of these infrastructure, right? So that's a huge opportunity again. Not just the goods that are being transported, but enabling the transportation itself, right, is a huge business opportunity. If you think about it. So in that sense, yeah, I think it's a good segue to build infrastructure, in my view.
Oh, that's a great example you mentioned, right? The business opportunity of actually building infrastructure like Middle East. And I've been, going to the Middle East for almost 30 years now, and it was mostly, cars and airplane related transportation. But recently I saw with the Etihad rail, right? And they're trying to connect major cities in UAE via the rail. And then I'm sure that, like you mentioned, right, India with its vast expertise in rail networks and other infrastructure can help UAE and Saudi in that aspect, right? And
Right.
so I want to kind of move to the next segment of our podcast, right? And trade routes are always fascinating because it's something that is very ancient, and and then there's always going to be comparisons, right? How does IMEC compare with BRI, for example? Patri talked about a little bit, but I want to ask you, how does IMEC compare with ancient trade routes, right? Like the Silk Route, or even ancient routes that India had, for example, which you covered in your book, Kautilyanomics for Modern Times, right? Is IMEC taking inspiration from these? What are the learnings that we can get from these ancient trade routes?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, some of my books, I think, deal with this. Um, and, there are a lot of interested readers who want to know more about this. Um, and yeah, if you really look at the ancient roots, even I'm talking about not just early Common Era period, but much before that. You had trading entities from Israel and Haifa all the way till Vietnam in Cambodia, going through Bharat. Southern Bharat, Northern Bharat, there are various trade routes, the maritime routes, which go, via the Southern Bharat and even go to Southeast Asia, which the Cholas did. Similarly, the Southern kingdoms, the Vijayanagara Empire, the Pallavas, the Pandyas had extensive trade networks, right from Middle East through the Middle East route that we're talking about. So this IMEC route is not a new route. The IMEC route has been the status quo for thousands of years, and there is substantive evidence for it. My books sort of highlight that. There are various other authors who have written about it. Periblis of the Erythraean Sea is an example. So this hasn't been an ancient route because this is frankly the way to connect all these places. So it's a time-tested route. Right? That's why you see a lot of traders or trading elements in ancient Bharat, which emanates from a lot of these places. You had perfumes. In fact, the current account deficit of Rome in early CE period was highly influenced by exports from southern Bharat. So much so that coins, the greatest coinage of European coins, was found in southern Bharat after Europe, the second biggest, discovery in early CE period. So in fact, to the point where even the current account deficit of the Roman Empire was largely influenced by the products that are being imported from Bharat. And we were a sort of a global, world beater in it. Not just, coins. I mean, not necessarily, not just, perfumes, not just a variety of products, spices, metals. There were, various ornaments which were traded, various types of furniture. And a lot of these things were exported to Middle East and Europe. And this trade route was a very important route as well, which enabled this. So there's definitely historical precedent. I think it's important to understand, look, one of the things that helps is this trade route was there for like thousands of years, right? Even today it exists, which means there's a certain inherent sustenance of this route, purely from a commercial standpoint. And I think that is something which we can sort of peg our analysis on and say that, look, this is something which has been there for a long time. So it means there are certain inherent advantages for the countries involved in it. And that's an important point. And the second thing is, I think we are in a structure, but a faster movement of, goods and services. So I think, if we use some of the principles of the past, we'd be, far more efficient, given our improvements in technology in the modern era. And I think that's again an important lesson to learn. And lastly, I think you need to also understand that, look, even all these years, other forms of barriers in terms of, religion or language or geography or even topography, all of it is overcome, as far as commerce was concerned. So there is no reason for us to sort of think about any differences and then try to, make use of all the advantages and the commonalities that we have to ensure that it mutually benefits all the stakeholders. So I think this is an important lesson, because if it's sustained for such a long time in terms of a trade route, which means all the stakeholders wanted, ignored their differences and focused on just the commercial outcomes and the benefits that it accrues. I think that's an important lesson in a polarized world, for us to, engage and perhaps explore this.
Oh, that's great, right? And like you said, it's very important to learn from the past, and there's so much that we can learn in terms of how it contributed to the economy. And I picked up a very interesting thing. You focused a lot on southern Bharat, and kind of being the epicenter of trade, and also connecting Haifa in Israel to Vietnam. I'm curious
Right.
which ports in southern Bharat were part of which exact ports were part of this transition or this route between Israel to Vietnam, and what was the exact map, if you could tell us, like starting from Israel to Vietnam, what was the path followed?
No, see, there are various sub-routes in this. By and large, what you find is, that, like what you mentioned, through the Suez Canal, there's a particular route that comes through which the current route is made. and then that reaches southern India through the Bay of Bengal. Through the Arabian Sea, and then via the Bay of Bengal, you go to the rest of Southeast Asia, and then via the Straits of Malacca, and then go to Singapore, and then go up all the way to China. That used to be the sort of route, and then Vietnam also goes there, right? But there is also a land route which was going from Eurasia, which is a much more longer time frame, where there's some evidence which I showcase in my books, where through the Eurasian route and through the Indian Himalayan plains, people go via Cambodia and then into Thailand and Siam and Vietnam, right? Which is basically a land route which goes from Europe all the way uh, um, till Cambodia and Vietnam or Thailand. So that is again a longer sort of route, but the maritime route was the most popular one, which is basically using either the Suez Canal or the Straits of Hormuz, and then from there coming to a contemporary Middle East, and the sea there, and then coming to the Bay of Bengal and the rest of the Indian Ocean. So that's why the entire Indian Ocean was the epicenter of global trade. Sanjeev Sanyal talks a lot about this. I've also written about this. Entire global trade for much of the early Common Era period and before, the epicenter was not the Atlantic Ocean, was not any other ocean, but the Indian Ocean. Because much of, the two biggest countries in terms of per capita income were India, Bharat, and China. And they were consistently trading with Western Europe or rest of Europe and Middle East and the rest of Asia. And the entire sort of, center point of this was the Indian Ocean, the connecting point. And that's why maritime trade was a very important enabler of commerce. And mind you, we're talking about thousands of years back, right? Which means this notion that somehow Bharat became open to the rest of the world only after 1990, economic reforms of 1990, is a misnomer, is probably the biggest misnomer that can there be in economic policy discussions. Because we were extremely open, except for the post-independent period, till about 1990. Much before that, our status quo was engaging with the rest of the world. We had Greeks, we had Israel, we had Jews, we had Chinese, we had, you name a nationality, they were all there in Bharat trading and engaging and sharing ideas, writing books, talking about being part of corporate guilds, which were Shrinis. You had these Shrinis, which were corporate guilds that were enhancing trade. There's a guild called Ainurvar, which is called 500 Tamil, which is a major multinational corporation. It had offices in Indonesia, in Thailand, in Sumatra, and in fact, it triggered the Cholas to go and fight a war in Southeast Asia, because one of these guilds were being discomforted by one of the rulers in Indonesia. So that's why the Cholas won the war, but did not rule Southeast Asia. So anyway, so what I'm saying is a lot of these guilds, corporate guilds, had various members who were foreign nationals, including Jews, it was a very egalitarian setup. It was very democratic. So these institutions survived for a long period of time because fundamentally, I think Bharat was intrinsically an open society. Our values, our way of life imbibes new ideas. It's inclusive, it's open. And I think that reflects in commerce as well. And that's why they've sustained. So I think in general, these routes, there are various types of routes, different ways of approaching this. But by and large, the Indian Ocean was the epicenter of global trade and commerce, especially in the early Common Era period.
That is really fascinating, right? And it's like a lot of what is happening today has already happened in the past, maybe in a different way. But then
Right.
the core of Bharat has always remained, being open to trade, inclusive, and working with different countries. Uh, just coming to the end of the podcast, right? We covered a lot about the advantages of IMEC and how it can contribute to economy, and then its inspiration from ancient trade routes. I want to jump into for the last part. I just want to jump into some of the risks that you see with IMEC, right? Can you, just one question that comes to my mind is in terms of, if there is a conflict between one or two countries in this route, how will that impact IMEC? And it could not just be between India and some other countries, but also between countries in the route. And also, is India, and it's good to have options. Dr. Jaishankar, once I remember I think it was uh, with the German foreign minister and the then US Secretary of State and Jaishankar, and then he talked about India having a lot of options, right? In terms of partners. But in trade route also, it's good to have options. But is sometimes having too many options a good thing or a bad thing? Would love to know your perspective on both of those.
Yeah, see, there are two major things, right? One is the geopolitical situation. I mean, the point of having such an agreement is also to ensure that the opportunity cost of geopolitical conflict is very high, right? One of the ideas, fundamental principles of global integration of economic values or economic systems is to ensure that the opportunity cost of any geopolitical conflict is too high for the stakeholders to get involved, which means they get into a war, it creates unnecessary destruction for everyone and doesn't benefit anyone, right? Because the economic benefits of integration is far higher than the destruction geopolitical conflicts creates, right? So inherently, though it's not explicitly mentioned out loud too often, but the underlying principle is, one of the principles is this, right? So one hopes that if such an agreement comes into a very consolidated outlook and it's mutually acceptable to the parties involved, then it reduces the propensity of these conflicts to arise, right? So having said that, conflicts arise, as we have seen in recent months, out of thin air. You never know when they come about. So what are the mechanisms in place, within this agreement to ensure that if conflicts occurs, what is the resolution? How do we ensure that some of these things happen? So that's, I think, one of the risks that we need to explore more and come to an understanding of these sort of hypothetical events so that people are more attuned to this, right? The second thing is, in terms of the mechanics of the agreement, again, that, in terms of negotiations and things, I think our interest and what the mutual interests of the parties are is something we need to also be cognizant about. And of course, I think no one is saying that unfettered trade is the magic pill. I think the consensus in mainstream economics, as well as others, have come to the point where, people want to look at free and fair trade as an important instrument of any agreement. So I think sticking to those principles of free and fair trade, and then ensuring that the benefits are enhanced is something we need to be cognizant about. So I would say these are some risks which are there, like any proposition, and we need to be wary of it. But from what we are seeing, both purely from an academic standpoint, from a research standpoint, the ability to expand economies of scale is far higher, and the possibilities of benefits in this fragmented world, this is an important avenue which can be expanded to benefit other countries in the bloc, in the IMEC bloc, as well as Bharat itself.
No, that's a great answer, right? Increasing the opportunity cost of conflict, will automatically kind of reduce the chance for conflict. On that note, I would love to thank you for your time today and your fascinating insights, right? Not just on the current IMEC corridor, but also delving into the past. And on a personal note, my brother is also a fan of your books, Thermonomics and Cortilleonomics. Thank you again for sharing your insights, and also like to thank Dr. Badri, who left after 5 to 10 minutes. He had a conference to attend. So thank you, Sriram and Dr. Badri, again for your time today.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Krishna. Good to talk to you, and look forward to engaging with your audience on this important subject.
Thank you.